Greetings, welcome to W12U3 Summary of the course Outcome Based Education and Accreditation Part 1. In the last unit, we understood the proposed transformative reforms in accreditation as indicated in Radhakrishnan Committee report. With that, formally the content of the course is over. So, in this unit and in the next unit, we will just put together all the topics that we discussed in this course outcome based education and accreditation. In two parts, we will simply summarize the various topics that we touched upon in this particular course outcome based education and accreditation. So, it is a summarization of the entire course. It was a 3-credit course and was of 12 weeks duration. Each week had 4 to 5 video lectures about half an hour each. Then the course presented in details the concepts of outcome based education, including the nature of engineering programs in India, particularly undergraduate engineering programs in India, both in autonomous modes and in non-autonomous affiliated modes, the roles and features of program educational objectives, what the NBA has specified as program educational objectives, what is the role of these PEOs and what are the features of the PEOs, then the program outcomes which are typically listed by the NBA. Currently, the number has changed, but earlier also the program outcomes were listed by NBA. So, what are the PEOs in the current NBA norms? Then program specific outcomes, what are they and how are they formulated and what should be the features of PSOs. Then to list all these things and to structure the outcome statements properly, we need a taxonomy. So, we discuss the features of revised Bloom's taxonomy, the role of affective and psychomotor domains in engineering programs. Then finally, computing the attainment of COs, course outcomes, POs, program outcomes and PSOs, program specific outcomes, and closing the quality loop at the course level and at the program level. So, this was one part of the course, that is essentially the concepts of outcome based education. The course then described the accreditation by National Board of Accreditation and by National Assessment and Accreditation Council NAC. So, in part 1 we look at the outcome based education principles, and in the next unit we will look at the accreditation by NBA and NAC. Outcome based education is an approach, as we mentioned in earlier units, to education in which decisions about the curriculum, instruction and assessment, 3 aspects, curriculum, instruction and assessment are driven by the exit learning outcomes that the students should demonstrate at the end of a program or a course. So, the driving force is the learning outcomes, that is the starting point, the driving force. Once we have the exit learning outcomes listed, the curriculum, instruction and assessment are designed in such a way that these learning outcomes are attained by the students. So, in outcome based education, product defines the process. The NBA of India adopted OBE in 2015 itself, though now it is a revised framework, it continues to be based on outcome based education. The NAC adopted that in 2017, in 2016 in principle it accepted, but the documents became OBE included in 2016's revised accreditation framework. Of course, now it is undergoing another transformation, but that also will adopt the outcome based education principles. The basic tenet of OBE is that students learn well when they are clear about what they should be able to do at the end of a course, that is the outcome. Assessment is in alignment with what they are expected to do. So, basically what the students are expected to do is outcome, and the students are assessed on that expected outcome only. So, there should be an alignment between assessment and outcome, and instructional activities are designed and conducted to facilitate the students to acquire and demonstrate what they are expected to do. So, the instructions must promote the acquiring of the stated competencies or the outcomes. So, there should be a alignment, what some people call as constructive alignment also, between the outcomes, the instruction and assessment. That is the basic tenet. So, the NBA framework, NAC is slightly different, but still the broad principles remain same, is that we start with the vision of the institute, then the mission of the institute, and based on that the department comes out with its own vision and mission, and that leads to program educational objectives. Then program outcomes are stated by the NBA. Then the department advisory board or board of studies comes out with program specific outcomes. So, we have program outcomes and program specific outcomes, and they in principle should lead to a design of an appropriate curriculum. The curriculum should enable the students to attain the program outcomes and program specific outcomes. The curriculum will consist of several diverse components: humanities and social sciences, basic sciences, engineering sciences, professional core, professional electives, open electives, project. It could also include the minor, major. Now these things are coming up, honors programs. These related courses are coming up as separate units. Whatever be the basic idea, the curriculum components are all listed here, and under each component there are several courses. Finally, these courses are described in terms of the course outcomes. That is the basic framework that we discussed in one of the early units. And the levels of outcomes we saw as a program educational objectives. These are broad statements that describe the career and professional accomplishments of the graduates in 4 to 5 years after graduation. So, we are talking of what the alumni would be engaged in 4 to 5 years after graduation. So, this is very important, program educational objectives, a long term view. Then program outcomes and program specific outcomes, these are statements that describe what the student should be able to do at the time of graduation from the engineering program, just at the time of graduation. PEOs 4 to 5 years after graduation, PEOs and PSOs just at the time of graduation. PSO are statements that describe what the graduates of a specific engineering program should be able to do, whereas POs state the competencies of engineering graduates from any discipline, whereas PSOs are specific to a particular program. Course outcomes are statements that describe what the student should be able to do at the end of a course. So, at the levels if you see, lowest level is course outcome, then through them program outcomes and program specific outcomes are realized, then that leads to the program educational objectives being realized over a period of 4 to 5 years. The NBA in the revised framework that is applicable today has only 11 POs. The earlier NBA had 12, but now it has reduced it to only 11. So, we discussed all these 11 POs starting with engineering knowledge and PO 11 being lifelong learning. We discussed each PO in great detail. We explained the relation between the complex engineering problems. All these POs, many of them mention complex engineering problems. So, we explained the concept of complex engineering problems, then Washington Accord knowledge and attitude profiles WKs, then WPs, their contextual interpretation based on the Washington Accord, then the engineering activities, range of engineering activities based again on the Washington Accord, and illustrated all these concepts with examples. You can refer to the IEA graduate attributes and professional competencies 2021 September 21 PDF document for details about the WKs, WPs, EAs, etc. Okay. We discussed all this in the earlier units. Then each PO was discussed in detail along with activities that promote the attainment of that particular PO. Not only the courses, but other related activities that the instruction could engage the students in for promoting the attainment of that PO. Then mapping between typical engineering curricula in India and the POs was also discussed, and the limitations of most of the engineering curricula in facilitating the attainment of POs was also discussed. Then we looked at the taxonomies of learning. So, we briefly discussed several different taxonomies of learning and taxonomies in general. We presented the Bloom's taxonomy. We recommend the revised Bloom's taxonomy in our course. According to this taxonomy, any given task tends to be generally dominant in one of the three domains: cognitive domain, affective domain, or psychomotor domain. The cognitive domain deals with a person's ability to process and utilize information in a meaningful way. The affective domain is concerned with the feelings and attitudes. Psychomotor domain involves manipulative or physical skills. Of course, this classification we noted is for focus and convenience. All the three dimensions are involved to varying degrees in all intended learning experiences and activities. Then we discussed the major revision of Bloom's taxonomy, which appeared in 2001. Anderson and Krathwohl led this movement, and they came out with a handbook, Taxonomy of Learning, Teaching and Assessment, and that had certain major changes to the basic Bloom's taxonomy, and we follow this revised Bloom's taxonomy. The revised Bloom's taxonomy had two dimensions: cognitive process dimension and knowledge dimension. So, this is how it is shown. In a later slide, we will show this in the more standard matrix form, that is the cognitive process along the rows and the knowledge categories along the columns. But here just to show that there are two dimensions, we have put them side by side. On the cognitive process side, we have 6 processes hierarchically arranged: remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate and create. Generally, we consider the higher form of apply, analyze, evaluate and create as higher order thinking skills or higher order cognitive abilities. Remember and understand as lower order, though sometimes understand can be more difficult than the apply. But this is the hierarchically organized cognitive process. The general implication is that if a student is capable of carrying out an activity at a given cognitive process level, all the lower level cognitive processes are within the grasp of that student. That is the general implication of saying these are hierarchically organized. So, we do not have to keep saying remember, understand and apply. If a student is able to apply, it also implies that the student understands as well as remembers. Okay. Then the knowledge categories: factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge and metacognitive knowledge. We discussed all these things in quite elaboration, giving examples of all these things, and we also noted that at the time of the revision, people did not realize the importance of metacognitive knowledge, but today it is accepted as an extremely important and powerful aspect that all instructors must be concerned with, because it has a dramatic influence on the quality of learning by the students. Then we discussed the categories of engineering knowledge. The 4 categories listed here are the general categories applicable to any domain of pursuits, whereas specifically if you look at the engineering activities, what are the knowledge categories that the engineers engage in? Several people try to come out with the taxonomies of engineering knowledge. We follow the taxonomy proposed by Vincenti, who wrote a wonderful book called What Engineers Know and How They Know It, Johns Hopkins University. And from that book we distill and bring out 4 categories of knowledge as specific to engineering, and we add them to the general categories. That is, we accept the 4 general categories: factual knowledge, conceptual knowledge, procedural knowledge and metacognitive knowledge. To them we add 4 more categories as specific to engineering. So, not every course may have these categories, but a course which focuses on engineering can have the course outcome statement including these categories. So, these 4 categories were fundamental design concepts, criteria and specifications, practical constraints and design instrumentalities. Again, we discussed all these 4 categories in great detail, giving examples of each variety and when it makes sense to have these as part of the course outcome statements. Then we suggested using the 2-dimensional taxonomy table of the revised Bloom's taxonomy, adding the knowledge categories of Vincenti. So, our 2-dimensional taxonomy table presented has cognitive processes along one dimension and knowledge categories along the other direction. We place the course outcome, the instructional activities related to that CO and the assessment items related to that CO in the taxonomy table. Notice when we talked of the basic principle of outcome based education, we mentioned 3 aspects: what the students are expected to do, the course outcome, what instruction is carried out to enhance the attainment of those outcomes, instruction, then how it is assessed. So, assessment activities. So, all these 3 based on the cognitive process involved and the knowledge categories involved, all these 3 items can be placed in the taxonomy table. An ideal scenario is that these are constructively aligned very tightly. That means, ideally in a single cell all these things happen. The outcome, the instruction and assessment are all in a single cell. That perhaps will not always happen. So, whether they are in compatible cells has to be examined. So, it allows the instructor to see what is the extent to which the outcomes, the instruction and the assessment are aligned to each other, and that allows us to judge the quality of the assessment as well as instruction, and such a table would be extremely helpful. Okay. So, this is the table that we have suggested. We also presented examples of the alignment in the outcomes, the instruction and assessment. We also gave examples of how to place the different items in the revised Bloom-Vincenti taxonomy table. Okay. As you can see, the 6 cognitive processes are from the revised Bloom's taxonomy, and the knowledge categories, 4 are general categories from the revised Bloom and 4 are from the Vincenti classification. Then we briefly looked at the psychomotor domain, affective domain and the related spiritual domain. Notice it is a spiritual domain, not a religious domain. So, we very clearly established how the affective domain leads to spiritual domain, what are the features of these affective domain and spiritual domain, how one could train the students in these domains. We also presented the details of psychomotor domain, which includes physical movement, coordination and the use of motor skill areas. and we presented Fierce and Gray taxonomy, which is actually an adaptation of the revised Bloom's taxonomy for the psychomotor domain. Then we presented details of the affective domain, which is most commonly associated with feelings and emotions, and again described the Fierce and Gray taxonomy for the affective domain also. Then we discussed the affective domain and emotional and social intelligence. We presented approaches to deal with these issues in these domains. Okay. We then discussed the features of spiritual domain. Then we discussed in detail program educational objectives and program specific outcomes. We noted that PEOs are what the graduates of the program are expected to achieve within 3 to 4 to 5 years after completing the program. So, we illustrated these concepts with examples of PEOs from different disciplines. Then we discussed the correlations between PEOs and phrases of mission statements of the department. We showed that there must be a two-way link between the mission and the PEOs. That is, a mission phrase should have a corresponding relevant PEO, and if a PEO is stated, it must be backed up by relevant mission statement or a phrase of the mission statement. And then we explained how such a matrix of correlations is to be developed, and we mentioned that that is part of the NBA accreditation criteria also. So, we discussed the matrix of the PEOs and phrases of mission statements. Then we discussed the program specific outcomes, which are outcomes specific to a program. PEOs are common to any engineering program, any undergraduate engineering program. PSOs are specific to a particular program like electronics and electronics engineering. So, we explained the development of PSOs and illustrated them with some examples. Then we came to the course outcomes. We discussed the characteristics of good course outcomes and a structured way of writing good course outcomes. Course outcomes could be written in several different ways, using several different taxonomies, using several different structures. We proposed one way of writing good course outcomes within the framework suggested by the revised Bloom's taxonomy, and we suggested writing COs in that framework. Okay. And we said that it has 4 elements. We explained those 4 elements with examples also, and also we discussed the use of AI tools in the current technological scenario in developing COs of good quality. Then we also gave a list of do's and don'ts in writing the COs, and also provided a checklist for good COs. Once you write a CO, you can go through the checklist to see if you have followed all the suggested guidelines and cautions. Then we illustrated with examples potential pitfalls in writing COs, what kind of mistakes typically are done in writing the COs. These examples were picked up from the actual participants in workshops that we conducted, Professor Anjira and myself, and we explained the general pitfalls which happen while writing these COs, and we further presented some examples of good COs. Then the structure that we presented was this. It has 4 components, 2 of them are mandatory, 2 of them are optional. Action, that represents a cognitive, affective or psychomotor activity that the learner should perform. An action is indicated by an action verb, sometimes by 2 or more action verbs, representing the concerned cognitive and sometimes affective processes. So, the first is the action. The second is the knowledge, represents the specific knowledge from any one or more of the 8 knowledge categories. Knowledge categories need not be from only one category, it could be conceptual as well as procedural as well as fundamental design concepts. There could be multiple knowledge categories, that is okay. But a CO statement must mandatorily have an action and a knowledge category. Then 2 more which are optional: condition, represents the process the learner is expected to follow or the conditions under which to perform the action. There may be several different ways of performing the action. Then if the outcome insists that the student must follow one particular way of demonstrating that action, then condition can be used to list it. Then the fourth one, which is also an optional one, is criteria, represents the parameters that characterize the acceptable levels of performing the action. While the basic action could be correct, there could be further guidelines on the required levels that could be in terms of accuracy, it could be in terms of deviations, whatever you want to call, approximations. So, the acceptability levels of performing a given action, this is also an optional element of a CO. Then we presented several examples of good CO statements as well as poorly structured CO statements. We indicated the pitfalls. Some of the typical examples that we could look at are: calculate major and minor losses associated with fluid flow in piping networks, a good CO. Draw Bode plots for the given dynamic system and determine the gain and phase margins. These had now two action verbs: draw the Bode plot, determine the gain and phase margins, that is possible. Then determine the root of a given equation accurate to second decimal place using Newton-Raphson method. We specified the method, we also specified the expected accuracy, accurate to 2 second decimal places. So, a CO could include all these things. Determine the dynamic unbalanced conditions of a given mechanical system of rigid bodies subjected to force and acceleration. So, basically we indicated that faculty use this structure for a CO statement: action, knowledge, condition, criteria, with condition and criteria being optional. Then we looked at tagging the COs. So, the course outcomes, once they are written, they must be tagged with the POs to which they are related and PSOs to which they are related, then the cognitive level of that CO, knowledge categories addressed in that CO, and typically the number of classroom sessions or laboratory sessions or field sessions associated with that CO. This information we suggested could be used to determine the mapping strength between a CO and PO or PSO. Of course, there could be other ways of determining the mapping strength, but this would be one easy quantifiable way of determining the mapping strength between CO and PO and PSO. So, we suggested tagging the CO with the number of classroom sessions or laboratory sessions or field sessions or any other activity related to that CO. Then we discussed the issues in tagging COs with POs. How do we tag a CO with a given PO? How do we look at the action verbs implied by the PO and the action verbs implied by the CO, and how we determine that these two are correlated, and how do we justify them in the course files. So, we discussed in detail the issues in tagging the COs with POs and suggested guidelines for such tagging, and how a course file should indicate all these justifications very clearly. Then we observed that if the PSOs are written well, there should not be any ambiguity regarding the PSOs addressed by the course under consideration, because PSOs are specific to the program and they would have been developed based on the curriculum that we have in mind. So, it should be very clear, and most often a given course addresses one or maximum two of PSOs, most of the time a single PSO, occasionally maybe two PSOs. So, it should be very easy to establish the correlation between the CO and PSOs, whereas when it comes to correlation between a CO and PO, considerable effort is involved in determining first of all the correlation, then determining the mapping strength, and we have to do certain amount of iterations before everyone can agree with the correlation between the CO and the PO. Then we illustrated the process with examples of tagging the COs. Then we came to the last step in the outcome based education process, which is computing the attainments and closing the quality loops at the course level as well as at the program level. So, we discussed different ways of setting the CO attainment targets. Then we discussed computing the attainment of COs. The direct attainment of a CO can be determined from the performance of the students in all the relevant summative assessment instruments. Notice that we do not use formative assessments because formative assessments need not award any marks or grades. So, we use only summative assessments, but the summative assessments could be based on the continuous internal evaluation or in semester evaluation, people call it by different names, but essentially the assessment carried out throughout the semester and then an end semester evaluation that is carried out. The ratio of marks between the in semester evaluation and end semester assessment would differ. In the case of a non-autonomous institute, that generally is dictated by the university or the institute uses a procedure which is acceptable to the university or approved by the university. An autonomous institute has a much greater freedom. Typically, they use 50-50, sometimes 40-60, but it must be combined in a way that is justifiable. Okay, you must be able to explain the rationale for combining them in that particular ratio. So, in a justifiable way, they must be combined. So, we discussed the issues in combining these courses for Tier 1 institutes and Tier 2 institutes separately. Tier 2 institutes have the problem that we may not have course outcome wise marks available to us from the end semester examinations because they are conducted by the university. Then we also discussed that indirect attainment of COs was possible, though it is not mandated by NBA, and that can be determined from the course exit surveys. As this value is subjective and the sample is small and the period is only 3 to 4 months, we suggested that the percentage of weightage to indirect attainment if used should be kept low, say not more than 10%. Then we discussed closing the quality loop at the course level. So, after determining the total CO attainment value, CO attainment gap is determined as CO target minus CO attainment. Gap is greater than 0 means target is not attained. So, improvements must be planned, they must be specific plans, and if any resources are required, they must be listed. So, improvements must be planned to increase the attainment next time the course is offered, probably next semester or next academic year, but these must be recorded in a course file and they must be available for the visiting committee to examine, and you must have evidence that next time the course is offered, these improvements have been really implemented. Then if gap is less than or equal to 0, it means target has been attained or even exceeded. Attainment target may be enhanced next time the course is offered. If a particular target has been attained, we can become more ambitious and increase the attainment target next time, or it is also possible to retain the same target level even when it is already attained, perhaps for another year or two, with the rationale why we are doing it. We want to stabilize the achievement before we go on to increasing the target, or there are going to be changes in the curriculum happening. So, we would like to maintain the same achievement level. So, clearly indicate the rationale why we kept the target the same, but it is possible to have the same target. It is not mandatory that the moment you achieve a target you must enhance it. Then we suggested that improvement plans must be specific and planned carefully. We observed that there are no unique ways of setting the targets for the attainment of COs, computing the attainment of COs, increasing the attainment targets, planning for improvements in the attainment of COs. For none of these there is any unique standardized mandated way. The institute must carefully think, have discussions and come out with these activities. Focus is to present evidence based demonstration that the department is striving to improve the attainment of COs and is achieving better attainment of COs with each succeeding batch of students. Then we finally came to the last step, which is attainment of POs and PSOs. So, we discussed different ways of addressing POs and PSOs via core courses, projects both major and mini, seminars, presentations, internships, co-curricular and extracurricular activities, etc. All these contribute towards the attainment of POs and PSOs. Then we noted that while electives play an important role in the attainment of POs and PSOs, they do play a very significant role. They are not considered for computing the attainment of POs and PSOs, as by definition if it is an elective, not all students may credit them. So, while admitting the importance of electives, we do not use them in the computation of POs and PSOs. Then we discussed determining the strength of mapping between COs and POs and PSOs and using this mapping strength and attainments of COs to compute the direct attainment of the POs and PSOs. We explained them with numerical examples. Then we showed that the direct attainment of POs and PSOs is combined with indirect attainment determined from surveys of employers, alumni, graduating students, etc., to determine the total attainment. While computing the total attainment of a CO, the surveys are not generally encouraged. At best, it is limited to 10%. In determining the total attainment of POs and PSOs, it is suggested that surveys be used of employers, alumni and graduating students, because it is a period of over a period of 4 years that you are looking at the attainment of POs and PSOs. So, the total attainment is based on combining the direct attainment as well as the indirect attainment computed from the surveys. There are no hard and fast rules regarding the percentages in which they need to be combined, but we suggested that a well accepted ratio is 80%, 20%. 80% for direct attainment, 20% for indirect attainment. Then we discussed setting the attainment targets for POs and PSOs, and again noted that there is no unique way of setting these targets. These values are context sensitive. Then finally, closing the quality loop at the PO and PSO level. So, for each PO and PSO, set the attainment target, determine the total attainment value, both direct and indirect combined, then close the quality loop. If the attainment is less than target, then plan improvements. The improvement actions will have much greater choice when it comes to POs and PSOs, in which particular semester the activity has to be planned, what specific course, what specific activity needs to be planned. We have much greater choice. To that extent, the department needs to spend more time deliberating the choices before it, do some brainstorming and then come out with the specific improvement action plans. And these are required to be documented and demonstrated that they were implemented the next time these action plans were required to be implemented. The NBA documentation also requires recorded evidence of these activities. If the attainment is greater than or equal to target, then increase the target realistically. Again, we could continue with the same target level with appropriate justification as we mentioned with the course outcome targets also. Okay. Then determining the strength to which a PO, PSO is addressed and computing the attainment are approximations at best, because there are so many factors which are involved. Even if a more precise computation of a PO, PSO attainment is possible, the effort involved may not be worth it across all POs and PSOs across the institute. So, what is important is to follow one method across the institute, strive for continual improvement in the attainment, and most important, demonstrate the improvements with evidence, documentary evidence. Show the planning for improvement and the actual improvement with documentary evidence. So, what is important is the path along the growth trajectory than the actual numbers. Okay. So, that completes our discussion of the principles of outcome based education, and in the next unit we will summarize the OBEA course part 2, which is concerned with accreditation by NBA and by NAC and the reform proposed in the NAC. Okay. So, we will meet in the last unit W12U4, which will summarize the rest of the OBEA course. Thank you. We will meet again. Thank you.